and resting in awareness, it's very much recommended to have the eyes open, and we'll talk about why that is the case in those practices. But here for the moment, for today and tomorrow, we're working with the breath, so then you can adjust that either slightly open or closed depending on what works better for you. And in the speech, remember, was to do about if we come into meditation with an agitated mind, maybe negative state of mind, then it's often helpful at the beginning to do a little breath exercise, which we introduced yesterday evening and a little bit this morning. In this, we're using the technique of focusing on taking 3 deep breaths and focusing on that. Some traditions talk about counting 21 breaths, and in the Tibetan tradition, this is often presented in the form of what's called a 9-round breathing exercise, which can involve elaborate visualizations and so forth. So this is something that you can bring in if you find it helpful. So again, if you're finding that you're coming into meditation with an agitated, tense mind, a lot of negativity, then you can do a little breathing exercise to really bring the mind into a neutral state. And then preparing the mind, of course, is really about bringing the mind into the present moment and, of course, having good motivation. In the actual practice of Shamatha, there are 4 things we're looking at. The first 2 we already covered yesterday evening, but I'll review now, and then we'll look at the other 2 in the sessions this morning. First is, what qualities are we cultivating in this practice? And we said that in the meditation texts, generally 2 qualities are mentioned that we're cultivating in this practice of Shamatha: stability and clarity. So a stable mind to be able to focus on the object without becoming distracted, but also to focus on the object in a very clear way to overcome dullness. So a stable and clear mind. That's what we're cultivating. But we added a 3rd quality that you normally won't see in the meditation texts, and that is the quality of relaxation. And again, I think it is the reason it's not really talked about so much in the meditation texts, of course, which were written 1,000 or 2,000 years ago, is in those eras people were very relaxed and didn't need to be mentioned. Whereas in the modern society, I think it's a bit different. We have very hectic, fast-paced lives. Our minds tend to be very chaotic, a lot of agitation, a lot of tension, and we bring this into meditation. And then, of course, also with our modern mind, this striving mind, we need to achieve something, we need to get somewhere, then we push. And then we get distracted, and we think the reason we got distracted is we weren't pushing hard enough. So we tighten even more. We keep tightening. And then, of course, we get completely agitated and get exhausted from meditation. So I think this is one of the main difficulties we have as a beginner in meditation. We're simply too tight, we're too tense, we're simply trying too hard. So I can't overemphasize enough the importance of having that basis of relaxation. So again, as I mentioned yesterday, if all that we manage to achieve in this whole 10 days is that at the end of the 10 days we're a little bit more relaxed in the body and the mind, success. And to really highlight the importance of establishing that basis in relaxation, I'd like to read again from this book from Alan Wallace called Attention Revolution, talking about the importance of relaxation. And this is on page 14. He says the following: "Thus, our practice of mindfulness of breathing consists of prolonging our awareness of our breath. While this requires an alert mind, such concentration should not be tense, but rather balanced. When we discover that we've become distracted from the meditation object, it may feel natural to clamp down more forcefully, tightly concentrating the mind. You can see this in the facial expressions of people who try to concentrate in this way. Their lips become pursed, their eyebrows draw together, and their foreheads become furled with wrinkles. They're becoming concentrated, but just like orange juice, most of the fluidity is being drained from their minds. If you want to concentrate for a short time, and don't mind the side effects of tension and fatigue, you can follow the above strategy. But if you want to follow the path of Shamatha, you'll need an alternative. I had to discover this fact through experience. During my first extended Shamatha retreat, I was filled with enthusiasm. I wanted to take full advantage of the rare opportunity that was before me, for I was meditating in India under the guidance of the Dalai Lama. I had no financial worries and my material needs were easily met. All I had to do was put the instructions into practice. I threw myself into this training with all my might. Each morning I would rise at 3:30, except once I slept in until 3:45 and got upset with myself for slacking off. Enthusiastic I was, but so uptight. The Tibetan manuals on Shamatha meditation that I had studied over the years stated that the type of attention needed when one began such practice was, quote, highly focused. So I tried as hard as I could to keep my mind from wandering. Within a matter of a few weeks, devoting many hours each day to meditation, I could sustain my attention on my chosen object for up to half an hour. I was elated by making such fast progress. As the weeks went by, however, I found myself becoming more and more fatigued. I was draining myself both physically and mentally. My joy in the practice was diminishing accordingly, and I felt my attention was not developing any further. What was wrong? I was trying too hard. The cultivation of shamatha involves balancing the mind, and that includes balancing the effort exerted in the practice with relaxation. I think this points to a cultural difference between traditional Tibetans living in the highlands of Tibet and modern people leading fast-paced lives. Their senses constantly bombarded by telephones, email, the media, and noise. Years of such existence condition the nervous system and mind in ways that might have been considered torture in rural Tibet. One traditional Tibetan doctor whom I know once commented on people living in the West. So now he's quoting the Tibetan doctor who says, "From the perspective of Tibetan medicine, you are all suffering from nervous disorders. But given how ill you are coping remarkably well. Whether we dwell in Boston, Buenos Aires, Berlin, or Beijing, our minds are conditioned to be more high-strung and engaged in compulsive thinking than the minds of Tibetan nomads and farmers living a century ago. So when the Tibetan meditation manuals advise beginners to focus their attention firmly, the instructions are aimed at a very different reader than the average city dweller in the 21st century. Before we can develop attentional stability, we first need to learn to relax." So relax, 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 relax. That's the basis. So this is something new for many of us, of course, because, again, we tend to oscillate between two states in daily life. Either when we're alert, we're tense, and when we're relaxed, we're very dull. So we want to combine those two. We want to be completely relaxed and at the same time alert. So really working on that basis of relaxation is really cultivating a relaxed body and mind. And then you'll find on that basis it's going to be much easier to cultivate stability and clarity of attention. So remember that analogy of the tree. First, sinking deep roots of relaxation, that can support the trunk of stability. The stronger the trunk of stability, the higher the branches and leaves of clarity can grow. Objects. Again, in this shamatha practice, the general recommendation is use the object that works best for you. And then generally in the meditation texts, there's a long list of possible objects. But the one object that is probably most emphasized in most Buddhist traditions is the breath. And for many of us, I think that will be, at least initially, the best object to use. And as we saw yesterday, a quote from that 5th century master Sangha, who says basically, if discursive thoughts dominate your mind, and I think that accounts for about 95% of the modern day population, we're caught up in our conceptual mind, discursive mind, obsessive compulsive thinking, then the best object for you is the breath. That's what he says. Because the focusing on the breath gets us out of that obsessive compulsive thinking mind into the body, and it gets us out of the past and the future into the present moment. And the breath, compared to some of the other objects, is a little bit easier to focus on as well. So for many of us, I think the breath is going to be the best object or for shamatha practice. And we saw there a couple of variations that we're going through in this retreat. The full body, and very closely related, the rhythm of the breath, both of those, which we've already done, are very good for working with relaxation. The next practice that we're about to introduce is focusing on the area of the abdomen. Fairly easy to focus on. That's good for stability of attention. And then tomorrow we're going to move to working with the nostrils, a much smaller object, very good for clarity. And then the following couple of days we're going to be working with the mind and also the resting in awareness practice. Many of you will probably find these two much more challenging than the breath, but as we briefly saw yesterday evening, both of them can give us enormous benefits for us in the modern world. And we'll talk more about those practices, of course, in the next few days. So they're the three objects that we're going to be working with. And then also actually, one day we're going to combine the resting in awareness with observing the mind. It's sometimes called stillness in motion. And so that also has enormous benefits in the modern world, and we'll be practicing that as well. So they're the objects we're going to be working with in this retreat, in the shamatha part of the retreat. So that's qualities and objects. So now tools. What tools do we use in this practice? So there are two main tools in this practice called mindfulness and introspection. And mindfulness here is a translation of the original Sanskrit word smrti or the Pali word sati. And both of these two words literally mean memory, to remember. So mindfulness is simply our ability to remember the object. It's our ability to hold the object, to not forget it, to not become distracted. And so that is symbolized, we see that in your handout, the first page here, that's symbolized down here by a rope. So we see the meditator down the bottom here, and in the left hand is a rope. That's the rope of mindfulness. So we're tying our mind with the rope of mindfulness to the object. So that's the symbolism here. We're holding the object with mindfulness. So not to forget it, to not become distracted. Now, what we need to realize is that in a lot of the modern day mindfulness traditions, they have redefined what the word mindfulness means. So many of them get their practices from the original Buddhist tradition, but then when they present mindfulness, they often redefine it in a different way. So you'll find that in many modern day traditions of mindfulness, they'll present mindfulness as something like a non-judgmental awareness of whatever is arising in the present moment. Very good thing to do, but this is not really how the word mindfulness was originally defined. So we need to be aware of that difference of usage of the word mindfulness, otherwise we might just get confused. So again, here in the Buddhist context, mindfulness is simply to remember the object. It's simply our ability to hold the object. And it's often defined as the faculty of sustaining voluntary attention continuously upon a familiar object without forgetfulness or distraction. So again, it's our ability to simply hold the object not forget it, not become distracted. But we need a second tool, and that is introspection. And introspection is like quality control. So introspection is monitoring that mindfulness. Are we still holding the object, or are we starting to become distracted or dull? So introspection is quality control. And that is symbolized here in the diagram. In the right hand, the meditator has a hook, and that is the hook of mindfulness, to hook the mind back when we notice we've become dull or distracted. So they're the two main tools we use in this practice. Hold the object with mindfulness and monitor that with introspection. Sometimes this is translated as like vigilance, to be vigilant, but I think introspection is a good translation. To introspect has this sort of idea of monitoring. So we're monitoring the mindfulness. Are we still holding the object, or are we starting to become dull or distracted? And if we're noticing that we're becoming dull or distracted, we simply reapply mindfulness to the object, hold the object again. So they're the two main tools we use in this practice. So what I'd like to do now is briefly introduce the abdomen practice, and we'll do this practice before taking a morning tea break. So again, to talk about this practice, I'd like to read a little bit on Alan Wallace's Attention Revolution on page 31. And he says the following: begin this session as you did before by settling your body into its rest state, imbued with the three qualities of relaxation, stillness, vigilance. So again, a relaxed body, keep the body still as possible, and a vigilant posture is to keep the back straight. With this preparation, you establish a basis in relaxation. Without losing this sense of ease, now shift your emphasis to the cultivation of attentional stability. This is the ability to sustain the focus of your attention without becoming fragmented or derailed by the force of distracting thoughts and sensations. With this aim, instead of being mindful of various sensations of the breath throughout the whole body, focus your attention just on the sensations of the expansion and contraction of the abdomen with each in and out breath. Out of sheer habit, unintentional thoughts are bound to cascade through your mind like a waterfall. So now he's going to introduce a little technique to help us to avoid getting heavily distracted. Because one of the big faults initially is we just keep getting distracted all the time. And he says here, one way of stemming this relentless stream of thoughts is to count the breaths. Try that now by counting one at the end of your first out breath, then attend closely to the sensations of the breath through the rest of the exhalation and inhalation, and then count two at the end of the next out breath. Continue in this way as long as you find it helpful. Let these mental counts be brief so that your attention to the counting doesn't override your awareness of the breath itself. The objective of counting the breath is to insert brief reminders into the practice, remembering to remember so that you don't get carried away by distracting thoughts. Attending to these mental markers at regular intervals in the course of the respiration is like taking note of milestones on the side of a country road, letting you know by their presence that you are on the right track and by their absence that you have wandered off your chosen route. So I'll talk more about this counting the breath, but just a few points now, then we'll go to the practice. Counting the breath is not part of the actual normal practice, because what we're doing is we're adding something extra, some conceptual activity. So what we find with counting the breath is this cost-benefit relationship that for many of us counting the breath can bring a lot of benefit initially, because often initially we're just caught up in distractions all the time. Which means if we're occupying our mind with counting the breath, that can help avoid getting heavily distracted. But you'll find, particularly as we go deeper into the practice and you're better focused on the breath, if you then start adding counting the breath, that itself becomes a distraction. So at some point, it'll become a cost. The cost will outweigh the benefit. But what we're going to do now in this meditation is experiment with counting to see if it helps to improve stability of our attention. And the way we're going to do this in this practice is that at the end of the out-breath, we mentally count 1. And then on the following in-breath and the following out-breath, at the end of the next out-breath, mentally note 2. And then counting from 1 up to 10. If we lose count, then go back to 1. So we just go count from 1 up to 10, back to 1. If we lose count at any point, simply go back to 1. Some traditions talk about continuing counting, but this is what we're going to do. So what we're going to do in this practice is, again, prepare well, then focus on the sensations in the abdomen. So we're focusing on the rising and lowering of the abdomen, those sensations as we breathe. And then partway through the meditation, we're going to introduce counting. And we'll see if it really helps us to improve attention. Some people find it very helpful. Some people don't find it helpful. So we'll just practice that and see how we go. Okay? So let's do that practice. So again, we'll do a 20-minute session. We begin by preparing the body, setting the body into a state of relaxation, stillness, and vigilance. So remember, a vigilant posture is to simply keep the back nice and straight. And then at the same time, allow the entire body to become completely relaxed, completely at ease. And using the out-breath to relax and release any tightness or tension in any part of the body. and relaxing more deeply with each out-breath. And with each out-breath, letting go of any thoughts that may have arisen, happily releasing them. And simply allowing the mind to come to rest in the present moment. And simply becoming aware of the rhythm of your breath. Noticing if it's slow or fast, deep or shallow, long or short. Without trying to modify it in any way. So simply becoming aware of the rhythm of your breath. Now, whilst keeping that basis of a relaxed body and mind, now narrow your focus and focus on the sensations of the breath in the area of the abdomen. Focusing on the sensations of the rising and lowering of the abdomen as you breathe.